think the reaction is with increased business cost and planned changes to the employment regulations. There is great concern about whether employers will be able to afford to be hiring or investing in skills. So I think it's about people looking to prioritise what they need to be concentrating on. That would be about, what's our hiring process look like? I remember back in the pandemic when employers were actually calling, they didn't know how many people worked for them, and some didn't know what people actually did for them. So I think it's time to rewind, to reset, exactly what we have in our businesses so that we can future-proof going forward. There is some welcome for the working people who will be looked after better and feel better about it. But generally, there's a bit of fear and concern about the costs because of such things as the national minimum wage going up and various other costs to the business.
It might have been a bit hard for business, but actually the Chancellor was quite blunt in admitting that. She's been very clear that it's a one and done budget in the sense that this is the pain now and it won't happen again in the future. Now, we've termed that as a down payment on trust. The more important budget is probably next year or the year after, because if changes haven't started to be made by then, that's when that trust has been broken, and that's when business is going to get particularly angry and not be seeing kind of what has been promised there. So I think it was a mixed bag yesterday. Obviously, a number of tax increases across the board. We'll have to wait and see if that's, I would say, a one and done on that. But obviously, the NICs was the big one. There's been some reforms to business rates, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But as has already been mentioned, for the individuals, there are some little rays of hope in there. So on the whole, tough day for business, but I think it was slightly better in certain areas.
I think we all expected tax increases in the lead up to the budget. There was certainly lots of conversations around that. And in some areas, they probably weren't as bad as what we feared they might have been. But clearly that, the rise in NI is going to be a big hit for many businesses to swallow. I think you said there were some good things. So one of the pleasing things, if I didn't say in my intro, I'm also the finance director for the Somerset Chamber of Commerce, and think about Somerset businesses generally, 90% of our businesses in the county employ less than 10 people. So I think the rise in the employment allowance is a good thing to shelter them from that, from the general NI increase. But for most of my client base, which is family owner managed businesses of a slightly bigger size, there are a number of things yesterday. We either with the rise in NI for employing people, changes to capital gains tax in the future, changes to inheritance tax and availability of business property relief, lots of things there which are not good for businesses or for the family succession if they want to keep the family in the business. From generation to generation, I think that's going to be a really big talking point over the next few months. And I think we'll probably see a lot of lobbying from some organisations pushing back on some of those changes, and it'd be interesting to see if the government do hold firm or whether there is some concession and backtracking.
There's been a lot of we're going to kind of touch on a couple of things, Deborah. One is the employer NI contributions increase, but of course in the run up to the the budget, there was also some news around employment changes, etc. That weren't necessarily cornerstone of yesterday because they were kind of leaked a few weeks ago, weren't they? So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that and what's been the initial reaction from your clients and how they're going to absorb the kind of cost of the NI increase, etc.
I think as Mike and Jonny have said, we knew what was coming, and in terms of absorbing additional cost, it's going to, the reaction actually started when we knew what might be coming. So let's look at what people are doing now and what are likely to do. So we have a mix of restructures, which is around what actually are people doing and contributing towards the business. We have redundancies that come out of restructures. We've certainly seen a lot more of those than would be welcome. Yet on the other side of the coin, we're seeing takeovers, more TUPE, lots of talk about TUPE, transferring employees. So where, if you're looking at a business in Taunton who's communicating with us today to say, I'm taking over this business, what do I do about the employees? you're seeing the sort of positive side of some growth for other organisations. How that came about, I don't know. So I think the reaction is most people will be talking to their accountants today and their payroll providers to try and find out actually what that does cost us. I liked what Mike said about the rise in the employment allowance, because to me, I thought as a business who employs people, I thought, oh gosh, that's quite helpful. So I think there's still some time for people to consider the cost, but in the meantime, we've got new legislation that's in place, such as the new obligations under the Workers Protection Act, where we have more obligations for employers to be looking after, making sure there's no sexual harassment, third-party harassment. We've got the Tips Allocation Act, and then we've got people saying, well, if I can't remove people from my business, what do I do? So we're already talking to people about future-proofing the business, making sure that you've got your probationary periods at reasonable timescales, make sure that you've got your, induction right, your one-to-one.
And Jonny, just moving on to you, regards to one of the key aspects that the BCC were lobbying for is a reform to business rates, and there were some announcements regarding this yesterday, which I thought were quite interesting. It'd be good to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just very quickly to come back to the making work pay stuff, because I think it is so critical. It's worth noting in the OBR's forecast yesterday, they didn't include any of the making work pay costs or anything on planning. So that's a big factor to factor in there. On business rates, yes, BCC it's one of our top asks, has been for a while, basically to lower the multiplier on business rates. So currently 49.9 and 54.6, I want to say. That's too high. We're asking for 45p by the end of the Parliament. Other business bodies have asked for considerably some bigger reductions. For context on that, for every 1p that it's reduced, it costs the Exchequer 600 million. So it's an expensive thing to do. So it was welcome to see some announcements yesterday. Our position as the BCC is we don't like to pick winners and losers. Clearly, winners and losers have been picked on this, not entirely unreasonably. So obviously, retail, hospitality and leisure relief is currently sitting at 70-ish%. That's going to go down to 40%. So that will obviously be a hit to business, but at least there's still a relief in place. Alongside that, obviously, see a freeze in the small business multiplier, which is welcome. If not, we'd like it to go lower, but freeze is better than nothing. The interesting part really is from 26-27, a permanent lower multiplier for specifically retail and hospitality and leisure businesses. And they're going to pay for that by putting a higher multiplier on what they term valuable businesses. What that really translates to is big warehouses. So all of the big retailers with their big warehouses will be in a bit of a weird place because they'll get a reduction as a retailer if they're a smaller one. But the larger ones, it's basically the history of it is they've looked at introducing an online sales tax for years and can't get it through for various political reasons. So this is a way of taxing mainly online businesses who still have a physical infrastructure. So if you've got a lot of warehouses or you run large physical sites of above, I think it's 500,000 rateable value, you're going to be in for a bit of trouble come 26-27. So there were some positives in the business rates announcements, but we need to wait and see the detail. They also launched a consultation yesterday, so I would encourage people to read that document if you're interested on the Treasury website. It's not basically respond to questions. It's if you want to get involved, please email us and we'll add you to the mailing list. So either do it directly or BCC will be doing a lot on that. So feel free to come to us via the chamber and we're more than happy to include your views.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonny. And Mike, another aspect of the budget was capital gains tax. So with that, I'm not going to go into the detail on that. I'll let you kind of give a summary and just get any initial reaction on that from your clients. Or actually before the budget. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think before there was certainly a lot of speculation, fear around potential increases to capital gains tax, maybe as far as in line with income tax, removal of business asset disposal relief or entrepreneurs relief, as most of us still know it. So there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of conversations. Some of it was logical. It was kind of natural strategic planning that we've been having those conversations about. And it just meant that some of them were accelerated to make sure that things were completed prior to the budget. And that happened on numerous cases. Some where it was things within the family just to restructure things and keep businesses going for the future. Others where people were looking to exit and made sure they got that deal done before budget day. So there was definitely a flurry of activity in that sense. I think it was good that business asset disposal relief was retained. I think that's probably important. I don't think it ever puts off a founder. They're not going into it just for a prize right at the end. They've normally got a greater sense of purpose, but I think it's important that we do reward and incentivize people to take the risk and set up businesses and create employment opportunities and add to the economy. So I'm pleased that was kept. The increase in the rate isn't too much of a surprise, I don't think, to many of us. And I say the increase in CGT rates generally to 18 and 24% isn't as bad as what we feared. I think what we will see now post budget is probably another flurry of activity before the 31st of March next year when some of those increases do kick in. And I know some people, or numerous business owners at the moment, they're in discussions about exit, and I'm sure now they're going to be looking to accelerate that and make sure that completion happens prior to the 31st of March. That might have been a deliberate ploy by the Chancellor to try and get a cash injection and encourage people to get on and do these things, as opposed to a more elongated plan. So we'll see what happens there. I think, interestingly, the CGT changes kind of, they're important, but they're not as bad as what we feared. I think what I've had more reaction to since the budget was announced yesterday is the IHT changes, and certainly the BPR, and I know the Farms and Estates team here have had a lot of reaction to the agricultural property relief restrictions coming forward. So I think that's going to form a lot of conversations with my clients over the next 6-12 months in terms of planning and rethinking perhaps what they thought they might do on succession, and having to rethink some of those choices now.
With regards to inheritance tax, and
because I think with a lot of family businesses, a lot of the value is in the business itself. So first of all, if they're now going to have a charge to inheritance tax, are they actually going to have the cash to pay it? If it's all tied up in assets in the business, how are they going to fund it? If they need to extract money from the business in order to pay that in the future, there's going to be an income tax or CGT liability arising in order to pay the inheritance tax. So there's going to be planning there. And I think actually just in terms of family dynamics, there's people often structure, if they've got, I don't know, say two kids and one's involved in the business and one's not, they would be planning around the structure of their assets to try and maybe treat the kids equally, but keep the business intact and allow it to pass through the family. I think now some of that balance might have been put out of kilter, so people may need to revisit their wheels, revisit their planning and their strategies, and think longer term. So engaging in those conversations early and getting the right advice is going to be really, really important.
Any other measures that you welcome in the budget yesterday? So maybe Jonny, if I can come to you first, then I'll go to Debra and Mike, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, there were various things around kind of capital allowances, so full expensing, annual investment allowance, that were all continued. I mean, we weren't expecting to lose them, but it was good to see those in there. Once you actually factor in various allowances, 9 out of 10 businesses will not pay the headline rate of corporation tax, which I think is quite a strong statistic, but not necessarily one that plays out or doesn't feel like businesses will be doing that. So there's there. I mean, as individuals, there was some pretty good stuff around childcare, obviously capital spending as well, if that gets played out. Devolution, especially, depending on where your devolution deals are in various places, are positive. That's the direction of travel. Their term is to colour in the map. So if you haven't got a devolution deal, you're getting one at some point. And if you don't choose to have one, that's going to cause problems. I think probably one positive in a weird kind of roundabout way, and I've kind of already touched on it, is the Chancellor was pretty blunt and honest yesterday. Look, she said, almost set down a challenge for business and said, look, we're going to put all of the risk on, or a lot of more of the risk on you. So the challenge back to business now is the business community for us to go, okay, we're taking on the risk and we're going to grow, but you've got to give us the tools to do that. So I think it put business in actually quite a good negotiating position in the short term. The other one that hasn't come up yet, but is very much linked into it all, is the industrial strategy. I was on a call with Northwest Lancs Chamber earlier, and people were saying, well, where do we think growth is going to be? Where should we invest our time and money? Look in the industrial strategy, look at those 8 key areas they've chosen. That's where all their money is going to go. If you're doing something else, find a way to be part of the supply chain for that, because that's the way forward. We're a services economy. It was great to see professional and financial services explicitly mentioned in that document, because it says how much it means to the economy. So I think, yeah, there is a plus there in how blunt it was. It's for business to take that opportunity going forward, and we'll see where we go. But still, tough day overall.
Debra?
I think one of the things that 2 industry categories, clients of ours, that was welcome is the the rate relief on leisure and hospitality, particularly in those areas. Those are the people where the increase in the national minimum wage will be highly affected as well. So I think that's what for many of our clients in hospitality, that is quite welcome. Because as of previously with the employment rights bill, people were saying, well, we're only going to employ people for a year, we're not going to employ them permanently. My answer to that was, you might only be employing them for 6 months if that's the case, and obviously there will be loopholes for that not to happen. So I think that was welcome in terms of particular industry types. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
I think Jonny already touched on one of the things I was going to mention there about an investment allowance being kept. I think it was also important that R&D was retained. It's been sort of reduced, the benefit of that in recent years, but it's still there. So I think that's important, and we need to continue to encourage businesses to invest and carry out these activities.
Something that Somerset Chamber is really passionate about is seeing local businesses benefit from and deliver local projects. So the supply chain aspect for me is something that we're really passionate about. So I'm watching and waiting on any of that Somerset impact for us and how we can help on that. I was down at Hinkley Point C yesterday, just reflecting with them on £500 million worth of contracts that the Somerset Chamber have helped to match to local firms. So yeah, I think with this increase in spending, let's hope there's that local impact continues too, because that's how we all grow and prosper.